well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to Wolfpack Real Estate 101. I appreciate you joining me today and your interest in talking a little bit about what's happening in real estate and also maybe the buying and selling process if that's something that you're interested in, just have questions about, or maybe you're just curious. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. My name is Doug Yopp, and I am the owner of the Oceanaire Realty. I'm an NC State grad times two, 2000 and 2003. I'm originally from Sneads Ferry, North Carolina. I'd love to see raise of hands of how many people know where Sneads Ferry is, but I know you're all good Wolfpackers and know the state well, so you probably do. I started at NC State in 1997. My undergraduate was in communications with a minor in journalism, and I got my master's in sports management in 2003. I spent over 13 years working in higher ed and fundraising and advancement and development work throughout the UNC system across the state. In 2014, I decided to get my real estate license, and a year and a half, 2.5 years later, I decided to open up my own firm, which is the Oceanaire Realty, and that was in 2017. My team is a team of 16 licensed real estate brokers. We work out of the Triangle and also at the coast. So basically, we cover North Carolina, about a third of North Carolina, from the Triangle all the way down to the coast. So if you're in either area or in between, we can help you or your family or your friends. I have personally handled or overseen over 1,600 transactions in my 11 plus years in the business. And just a little bit about my involvement at NC State. I am currently a member of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. I'm also a member of the Council on Athletics, and I'm a volunteer with the Wake County Alumni Network in the leadership team. I am married to Amanda, who you can see there on the right-hand side. She's also an NC State grad, Cal's in 2001. We have two great sons, Everett and Winslow, who we're hoping will be future Wolfpackers. And we have two dogs, Boston and London, who are not pictured because we didn't take them with us to the Final Four, which is where that picture was taken. So they were at home. Moving on, just a little bit more about my company. It's called the Oceanaire Realty. I reestablished it in 2017. Oceanaire Realty was owned by my grandfather. My grandfather served in the Army in World War II. He was a rural postmaster. And after he retired from the USPS, he got his real estate license and opened the Oceanaire Realty. I remember growing up, going to his office at the beach. They had cork boards with Polaroids of homes that were currently for sale up on the wall because, we didn't have Zillow back then. We didn't have the oceanairerealty.com back then. They used to have phone books that would come out every month that had listings of what was for sale in the area then. And that's pretty much how people found out about what options they had other than driving around and looking at signs. So we've come a long way, and the technology certainly makes it easier for both buyers and sellers to view and understand what their opportunities are. And it also makes it better for us as real estate brokers to be able to explain the process and aid and helping folks accomplish their real estate goals. Our focus is on our clients, and we say we have the experience to help you make your best move. Why us? We're really passionate about people. We're a small firm. We're an independent brokerage. We're not part of one of these national brands. We're local. We live here. We work here. We've grown up here, gone to school here. So we understand the area. We understand the people in the area. We understand real estate market and trends in the area, and we understand how to help you accomplish your real estate goals. If you like to watch HGTV, I was on an episode of House Hunters with one of my friends who also went to NC State. That was a great experience. Our fans and our reviews always say the most about us. Our website has 500 plus 5-star reviews. We like to let other people know what folks say about us, because if you're trusting someone to help you make a several $100,000 decision, you really want to make sure that they know what they're doing, and there's no way to feel better about working with someone or at least taking advice from them than to hear what other folks have to say about them. So that's there if you ever want to check that out on my website. Our mission is really at the core of everything that we do and say and work on every day. And our goal, our mission is to give you the guidance and knowledge you need to make a decision that you're comfortable and confident with when you're buying or selling property. My job isn't to sell you a property or to talk you into making a decision. If we're talking, you've already made the decision to buy a home or sell a home or property. My job is to gather all the information I can associated with the process, with the property in particular, present that to you, disseminate it for you, help you understand it so you can make a decision that you and your family and the other decision makers are ultimately comfortable with. That's my goal. If I do that successfully, you'll be happy with the decision you make. So let's talk a little bit more about who's joining us today. If you'd like to comment in the chat, love to hear, see where folks are. If you're in Raleigh, Wake County, maybe you're at the coast, maybe you're in Wallace, maybe you're in Rose Hill, Duplin County, maybe you're in Rocky Mount. We go to all those places. Would love to hear where folks are. So Harrison and Allison, as people chime in, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, I think it would be great. I'd also love to hear in the chat, what are you most interested in? What brought you here today? Are you interested in buying? Are you interested in selling? Are you interested in just market updates and what's going on generally in real estate? So feel free to chime in, and that way I can make sure to tailor it a little bit more to what it is that you're interested in. I want to make sure that this is interested in helping for you. All right, I see we've got folks from Mooresville, we've got some folks from Raleigh, Fuquay. My brother tells me at least once a week. He used to live in Fuquay. Now he lives in Chapel Hill. God bless his heart. He says he would move back to Fuquay in a minute if he could. But, you know, children and other work for his wife make a difference for that as well. All right, let's see. Apex, interested in all topics, currently own a home. All right, well, thanks for chiming in, folks, and you can continue to comment. I appreciate that. Let's start with understanding today's market. Folks have questions about rates. I hear about rates or get questions about rates all the time, but also what are some trends? One thing I want to point out, this came out this week. U.S. home turnover is at the lowest rate in decades. You can see from this graphic where we were going back to 2012, that's 13 years ago, about 34 out of every 100,000 homes were selling. Got an uptick and then a little bit of a downtick, steady up and down until we hit what? What happened in 2021? Well, COVID, right? And that was pretty much one of the all-time highs you can see as the number of homes that were turning over during that time frame. Now, why was that? Anybody want to venture a guess or have some opinions on that? Feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute and we can talk about that a little bit. What we're seeing now is that folks are sitting where they are more than they have historically in quite a while. One of the main reasons for that is interest rates. Part of the spike for those turnover where rates were really low, I mean, historically low, between 2 and 3%. What happens when rates are historically low? Well, home prices go up, that's for sure. We can guarantee that. But people's buying power also goes that much further. If you're borrowing $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 at 2.5% interest, that's a lot less than maybe 6.5% or 7% interest, which is what we're seeing right now. So people, knowing that money was cheap, it was easier to make a decision about selling. And in a lot of cases, folks were locked into higher rates then. So a lot of folks were refinancing to drop their interest rate and drop their monthly payment then. But they also decided, hey, I'm working from home every day. My kids are home every day. My spouse is home every day. This house doesn't work for us anymore. So we saw, near all-time high in turnover during the 2021-22 time frame just because of that. And since then, as interest rates have creeped way up, you've seen kind of the effect of that. And that's more people sitting on where they are, sitting on their interest rate, not being as interested in making a move. When we're also talking about understanding today's market, that's kind of where we are as far as turnover. But you also want to understand what's happening with inventory. I would say right now we're in more of a buyer's market, even though some folks might disagree because they think interest rates are high. We'll talk about interest rates a little bit more in just a moment. But the reason I say it's a buyer's market is because the ratio of sellers to buyers is also very high. So buyers have more of a choice. We're seeing listings sit a little bit longer because there aren't as many buyers looking. So buyers are being more picky because they have more choice. Whereas maybe during 2021, 22 timeframe where rates were low, folks felt like, hey, I can buy a home and immediately invest in renovations, et cetera. Folks are looking for more turnkey properties now, unless the home is priced really appropriately, knowing that money is expensive to borrow, not only for a home, but maybe to do home renovations once they get in there. So it's important to set expectations with buyers when they're looking at properties, to understand kind of the marketplace that we're in and what their options may or may not be. It's also important to talk about sellers too who are entering the marketplace. So we'll talk a little bit more about all of those things as we move through the presentation today. Really, it's really important that you take advantage of someone who knows and understands and has the experience to talk about all of these different things, to put you again in the best position to make a decision that you really feel comfortable with. Also, understanding how new construction plays a role in all of this versus resale properties. And we can talk about that a little more as well. But as most folks are interested in, tell me about the interest rate. What's the interest rate today? Where are interest rates going? And how is that going to affect my buying power? So a snapshot on interest rates. Interest rates are higher than they were in 2021, 2022. But historically, they are still below the historical average, which is well over 7, approaching 8%. I know when my parents bought their home that they still live in the early 80s, their rate was 12%. Okay. Today, we're looking at on the right side of the graphic here, you can say the average 30-year fixed rate is about 6.37. Now, that's not going to apply to everyone because interest rates really come down to what's going on with you specifically. Okay. What's your income to debt ratio? What's your credit score? How much are you putting down? Are you interested in buying points to lower that interest rate? All of those can affect your actual interest rate when you purchase the home. So understand this doesn't apply as one figure to everyone across the board. Also, depending on what mortgage product you use, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, will impact what your rate will be. This is just a snapshot at today's point in time of where we are on average across the country. The graphic on the left side, which I think is more important for folks to understand, is where we are historically, coming from the late 70s and 80s down through the 90s and 2000s as things began to drop, hitting in 2021, 22, the lowest we've really ever seen in the 2s, and then the jump back up to the 6s, 7s, approaching 8. About a year ago today, we were around 7.1%. So even a year on, we're still a good amount lower than we were this time last year, even though folks feel like it's really high compared to where we were 2-3 years ago. Again, historically, we're really in a good position versus the average over time. Any questions about interest rates today, this graphic, any of those in the chat or unmute? Would love to have a conversation about that if people have questions, because this is really an important factor for folks. And it's one I want people to understand relative to where we are historically, understanding where we are today, where things are indicating we may end up towards the end of the year and going into next year, and how that impacts your decision maybe to go forward buying or selling. All right, I will press on. Feel free to jump in the group. So let's talk about why people buy. What motivates folks to buy a home? Well, life changes. That makes sense, right? You get married, you have children, maybe you downsize, maybe your children went to school or have their own lives now, their own careers. They don't live with you anymore. And maybe your 3,000 square foot house is too big. You don't want to pay for those utilities or the upkeep anymore. Maybe you retire and move somewhere else. There are a lot of reasons as far as life changes. Why do people buy? Building equity and wealth. Looking at the chart on the right-hand side, historically, homeowners are 43 times wealthier than renters. And that's because they're actually building equity over time. A lot of folks say, I don't want to buy a home, I'm just going to rent. It might be cliche, but let me tell you something. You're buying a home if you're renting, you're just buying it for somebody else. You're buying a home if you're renting, you're just buying it for someone else. Make sure that you understand that, because someone is paying for that property. And sure, maybe it's already paid for. That's great. You know what you're doing? You're buying another house for them. So kind of keep that in mind. That's where this graph comes in. Okay. So building equity and wealth, another reason to buy. Owning instead of renting allows monthly payments to go towards an appreciating asset. Stability and control, predictable payments versus rent fluctuations, which we've definitely seen in our marketplaces over the last several years. And also being able to customize your home. My wife and I have been in our home since 2014. And we've been renovating it since then. We bought our home as a foreclosure, and it needed a lot of work. And my wife really was not happy with me. And it took a while, but we've been able to really personalize it. We've redone our kitchen, redone our bathroom. We've finished our attic and made it an office space. So we've done a lot with it to make it our own. And sure, it would have been nice if we had walked into a home that had all that, but we couldn't find it. So we decided to take on something that we knew we could really make our own. And so that's what we decided to do. And you really can't do that if you rent a property. Investment potential, as I talked about, that long-term appreciation. We've seen a lot of record appreciation over the last 5 or so years. Especially in North Carolina, in our local markets, that's goes into building that personal wealth, is that appreciation, buying an asset and sitting on it. They say, don't wait to buy real estate and wait. When they say something like that, that's what they mean. Buy the property and it will appreciate over time while you're using it, or maybe while you're renting it. A lot of folks, and I've certainly worked with many investors in my career, they see real estate as a vehicle for building that wealth for their family, something that they can pass on to their children, leave to a spouse, to build generational wealth, to move along, to supplement income. And also there are tax advantages to owning property, as far as maybe depending on the way you do your taxes. And I'm not a tax expert, so please talk to your CPA, writing off your deducting your mortgage interest, but also maybe in selling and buying a property, utilizing a 1031 exchange to defer taxes. A lot of advantages in owning property. Also, another reason why people buy, well, lifestyle goals. Maybe your job changes and you want to be closer to work, so you don't have a 45-minute commute, you want a 15 commute, or same thing for schools. Or maybe you want to be closer to your family or your parents, or vice versa. They want to be closer to you. Maybe you need health care and you want to be closer to an area that has the health care that you need. Maybe it's just amenities. Maybe you like greenways and parks. Maybe you like to be close to the Hurricanes so you can go to soccer games or hockey games. I live about 15 minutes from Carter Finley and Lenovo. That was important to me and my wife because we have season tickets for both. We didn't want to be far from either one of them. That's amenity. Or simply the pride of home ownership. You want something you can call your own, something that can be yours, something that you can pass on to your family or build memories with your family. So let's talk about the home buying process. Now that we've talked about why people buy, I really want to educate you all on the process of buying a home. Before I get into that, I'll give everyone else opportunity. Any comments or questions you want to drop in the chat or unmute and ask. Give me a chance to take a sip. Also, if you've joined us a little bit later, feel free to drop in the chat where you're from, if you're currently a homeowner, and if you're more interested in understanding buying, understanding selling, or you're just here to learn about the process and market conditions. Would love to hear that feedback. All right, I'm going to press on with buying with the Oceanaire Realty. So one part of understanding the buying process is, well, why would you use an agent? What is our role in the process? I can search for a house online. I don't need an agent. Of course you can, and that's beautiful. And that's one of the great things about technology. But where we come in as an agent is, like I told you before, helping you disseminate all of the information around the property so you feel good about this, several $100,000 decision that you're about to make. Understanding buyer agency. Buyer agency means, hey, Harrison, you're looking for a house, you want someone. Harrison says, yes, I do, Doug. I want you to help me buy a house. What does buyer agency mean? What are you going to do for me? So when you enter into a buyer agency agreement, that means I'm working for you and I'm not working for the seller. In North Carolina, dual agency is allowed, meaning that one agent can represent a buyer and seller at the same time. That is allowed. I do not practice that. For me personally, I don't think I can do a good job for two people on the same property. I can't give all representing one person if I'm representing two people. So at my firm, buyer agency means I'm only representing you as the buyer. Now, I do work with sellers, and for the sellers that I represent, I will not work with the buyer on that property. If someone came to me, I would ask someone else on my team, a separate agent, to help them with that process. Within the same agency in North Carolina, that's called designated dual agency. So just to kind of help you understand the way that works. But as a buyer agent, what am I doing for you? Well, I'm giving you my loyalty. I'm pledging and signing that I'm going to work in the best interest of you, the buyer. I'm going to be obedient, meaning I'm going to do what you ask me to do and follow your lawful instructions. Accounting and dealings, that means I'm going to make sure I have a record of our conversations, of what you agreed to, what you're asking for, and then all of the financial piece as far as the contract, our agreements, all of that. Really, the big thing here is the disclosure. This comes down to disseminating that information around maybe a property you're interested in buying or later on selling. Understanding material facts. Understand what you're getting into. Making sure that once we have an inspection done, you understand all of the things going on with this house. Making sure that you understand going into this that no seller in North Carolina is required to disclose anything about their house, and understanding what that means to you. Making sure that you understand that most sellers will provide a disclosure that has yes or no checked about a lot of items regarding their house, whether it's the age of the roof, the age of the HVAC, if there are issues going on with plumbing, electrical, foundation, structure, all of those things, but also understanding that a seller may check no, but there might be something that they should have checked yes for. They just weren't aware of it, and that's not their fault. So that's why we have the home inspection done, and that's why we go through that process to make sure you understand what's going on, what can we negotiate for a seller to handle, whether they actually do repairs or maybe give you a concession so you can have the repairs done by someone you want to do them after the fact, and just seeing if we can come to an agreement where you feel comfortable about going forward. Okay. Confidentiality. I'm not going to reveal what you would be willing to pay for a property, how much you love the property, what you're willing to do to get the property until you tell me it's okay to disclose that. You know, reasonable skill and care. I do have 2 degrees from NC State, but guess what? That doesn't qualify me to be a real estate agent. I'm licensed by North Carolina. I have my North Carolina real estate license. I'm a member of the National Association of Realtors, which is above and beyond the licensure. And then every year I do continuing education to maintain my license. Again, this is all above, my education at NC State, which was great, a great foundation to build a real estate career, but not the knowledge I needed about being a real estate broker. The process. I always tell folks, if you check out or zone out about everything else, focus, as my kids would say, lock in for a minute and let's look at this together, because this is our 8-step home buying process. And if you pay attention to this one slide, it's really going to give you the biggest amount of insight to be ready for buying a home in North Carolina today. Now, the home buying process is different from state to state just because the amounts of money involved, inspections, timing, what sellers have to disclose is different from state to state. So if you've bought a home in Virginia or Tennessee or Florida or New York, you might understand the process there, but you don't necessarily understand the process in North Carolina. So walk with me through this 8-step home buying process. The first step is just more or less what we're doing today. If you are seriously interested in buying, I'd love to sit down and really have this conversation one-on-one with you so I can make sure you understand and I can answer specific questions. But this is kind of the 10,000 foot version of that strategy session where we're sitting down and talking about your wants, your needs, your time frame, really so I can understand and craft a search to send options to you that really work for what's important to you, whether that's location, price point, near amenities or schools or your family, or maybe it's bedrooms and bathrooms, maybe it's lot size, maybe it's HOA or no HOA, really just understanding that so I can make sure to be on the same page about what is meaningful to you. One of the reasons I love working in real estate is because I'm helping you make a decision about a place you're going to spend a lot of time in. And usually that's with your family and friends. And in a way, I feel like that makes me a part of my client's family. And that means a lot to me because I love my house and I love spending time here. And my agent was very patient with me because I bought this house before I had my real estate license. And I wanted to see a lot of houses, and she wasn't necessarily happy about that. But she is happy knowing that I love my house, 11 years later on. Step two, which is really step 1A, is how are you going to pay for your house? It's really important to have these questions answered before we step foot in the first house. Okay. And there are a lot of reasons why. One is you have to tell a seller how you're paying for your house when you make an offer. So part of the actual offer to purchasing contract is you disclosing how you're going to pay for your home. If you're going to pay with cash, that's great. We need a proof of funds to submit that shows your name and then that you have the amount of money in an account or accounts that you can cover the purchase price of the home submitted with the offer. If you're planning on getting a mortgage, we need an approval letter from a lender that says, Allison Hughes is approved for X type of loan for X amount of money. And then we have to submit that with the offer as well. As a seller, you're not just going to take someone's word that they can afford the house, nor should you. That's why you have to do this as a buyer up front. So you're disclosing how you're planning on paying for the house. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, I'll talk to the lender after I find the house that I like. Really not a good strategy. What if the same person that saw the house a week ago is ready now to buy the house? Well, you saw the house, but now it's going to take you a few days to get to the lender and get approved. Well, someone has scooped the house out from underneath you. That's why you need to be ready right away. Have that approval letter in hand before we start looking at homes. And not just so you can prove that you can do it, but so you know what price range you're comfortable with. Say, my budget is $350,000. Well, that's great. We can look at all the $350,000 homes in the world, but what does that mean to you as far as a purchase or as a monthly payment? How much are you going to have to bring to closing down payment to get that monthly payment where you want it to be? Say, okay, I'm renting right now. My monthly payment is $2,500. I don't have any money to put down on a house, but I want to buy a house where my monthly payment is the same as what I'm paying for my lease right now. Well, the lender can help you figure out what that looks like. That way we can set our expectations, get your finances in order, and that way you don't fall in love with a home you can't afford. And I can tell you that's one of the worst feelings, to see someone absolutely love a house, haven't talked to the lender, and then they figure out, I really can't afford a home in this price range. Do the homework up front. I can connect you with a great lender that can help you with that. And then you're prepared. You feel good about your finances. And then that way, when you walk in that home and your eyes light up and you look at your partner and you say, you know what, this is the one, then we can write the offer. We can jump all over it because we're ready. There's no other questions to get answered as far as that. Now, step 3, once we've done that, now let's hit the road running. Let's hit it hard. I've been sending you homes to look at. You've been making your wish list, your favorites list. Now we've got that approval letter in hand. Let's go. We're going to get out there. We're going to see them. Let's see as many as we can right after the other. That way they're fresh in your mind. You can compare and contrast. You can make notes. I love that floor plan. I hated that bathroom. I love that lot. I hated that neighborhood. I want to be near this school. I don't like that grocery store, etc. Now we're ready to make a decision. Once you've done that, we're going to write the offer. Now, part of writing the offer is not just what you're willing, but what should you be willing to pay? That's where I come in. As we're seeing homes, we're going to look at the disclosures together. This is where we're talking about helping you disseminate the information. How old is the roof? How old is the HVAC? Visually, what are we seeing that might be an issue that could come up on a home inspection report? Is the foundation cracked? Are we seeing cracks in the drywall throughout the house? What's going on with that big wet spot in the backyard? Is it on septic? Is it on sewer? All of these things to make sure that we're understanding and we can get answers to before we make an offer, right? Also, is it priced appropriately? One thing I always do when I show homes is I bring a CMA, that's a comparative market analysis. That's understanding how it's priced relative to similar homes in the area. I can look at the data and tell you when we're in the kitchen, do we have room to negotiate on this house or not? Obviously, I want to get you the best price possible, and that's going to be my goal. But a lot of folks will look at Zillow and look at the Zestimate, which is not based on the same data that I'm pulling. A lot of people will say, oh, well, my granddad told me about his neighbor who bought a home down the street and this is what they paid for it. Well, that home is, 400 square feet bigger and has a 1/4 acre lot. And this is on 1/8 of an acre. It's about having all the data. That's where I come in. I will bring you the data. I'll make sure you understand the data, how it stacks up versus other properties that we would consider comparables or maybe even not comparables, and sometimes to show you the difference, and then come to an informed decision about a realistic offer. Now, once we've written the offer, we submit the terms. It doesn't mean anything until they're accepted, and that means that everyone has signed all the documents. But when that happens, that means we're locked in, and going under contract has a couple of items that you have to financially commit to. And two of the most common ones in North Carolina, and they're not required, but they're very common, are due diligence and earnest money. Now, a typical contract to close in North Carolina is around 30 days, especially if you're getting a mortgage. If you're getting an FH or a VA loan, it might be a little bit longer. If you're paying cash, it could be a little less. But generally speaking, it's a 30-day process, contract to close. So what do we do during that time frame? Well, a couple of things. Your lender is going to be finalizing all the paperwork, going through things with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you're financially in the right position so they can fund the loan. The attorney is going to do the title search to make sure that the seller can provide clean title and actually sell you the property so there are no liens that can't be resolved, right? So what are we doing as buyer and agent? Well, we're going to do our due diligence, and that starts with the home inspection, okay? Like I mentioned before, one of my inspectors is going to do the home inspection and provide a very detailed report. And most of these reports are 30, 40 pages, and they are very detailed. But that doesn't mean everything that shows up on the home inspection is a bad thing. I like to explain a home inspection like a homeowner's guide. These are things you need to know about your home. These are the ages. These are problems that may be existing. These are things you may need to plan for down the line based on the age of those items. And then that puts you in a good position relative to where you are with your offer that you've given and has been accepted. And going forward, do we need to negotiate repairs? Sellers aren't required to fix anything, but especially if it's something that they weren't aware of, they're often inclined to negotiate, because if they don't, then they have to disclose it when they go back on the market again, should you decide to walk away. Now, as I mentioned, there are financial terms that have to be locked in here. During that contract to close process, the two amounts of money that are typically due are due diligence and earnest money. There are no set amounts for either one of these. The due diligence typically covers the first 14 to 21 days of the contract process, during which your lender is going to order the appraisal and we're going to have the home inspections done. That money's non-refundable. That money is you buying the time from the seller to take that home off the market, and they can't sell it to anyone else. And you're buying that time to do your due diligence to decide whether or not you want to move forward. That also includes not just the appraisal and the inspection, but also maybe negotiating repairs or some sort of concession for issues that need to be handled. Okay. Now, if you walk away, again, you default that money to the seller. You've bought that time from them. And if you decide not to go forward, they're compensated for that time. At closing, though, if you move forward, well, you get a credit for that due diligence money that you've already given them because you've already given it to them. So it will show up as a credit on the closing statement that the attorney will prepare. The second part of the 30-day process, contract to close after due diligence, is called the earnest money period. The earnest money period, unlike the due diligence, which goes to the seller, goes to the attorney, and the attorney deposits that in their trust account. Okay. If you walk away during that due diligence period, that earnest money can be refunded to you. Okay. From the attorney. But if you get through the due diligence period and then decide to terminate, that earnest money is also defaulted to the seller, again, to compensate them for their time taking it off the market. If you proceed all the way to closing, you also get a credit for the earnest money because, again, you've already paid that money. This is usually kind of where folks might have questions because this is definitely not how deposits necessarily work in other states. So I'll take just a second to see if anyone has any questions about the due diligence and earnest money. I'll state again, there's no set amounts for either of those. They are completely negotiable. Now, based on the price of a home or how long it's been on the market, I can give you a general range of what the due diligence money is going to be. I can also give you a general range of what the earnest money is going to be, but there are no set amounts. Someone asked me to repeat the earnest money. So contract to close is 30 days. The first 14 to 21 days of that period is the due diligence period. That's covered by the due diligence money, which is a non-refundable deposit that you give to, or payment that you make to the seller. That's theirs. They keep it if you walk away. You get a credit for it at closing. The remainder of that period, say day 21 to day 30, is covered by the earnest money. If you walk away during the due diligence money or period, you don't get the due diligence money back, but you can get the earnest money back. However, if you get through the due diligence period into day 21 through 30 and then change your mind and walk away before closing, then that earnest money also defaults to the seller. Casey, I hope that answered your question. Let me know if not. Okay, good to know. Again, you get a credit for both of those at closing. And again, both of those are negotiable. They're basically dependent on the price of the house, maybe how long it's been on the market, maybe if there's competing offers, etc. Those are all better discussed in a one-on-one setting once we're talking about where you're searching, your price point, etc. Moving on from the due diligence phase, now we're in the final steps of the process. So we've negotiated out any repairs or concessions for repairs. Everyone is agreement financially and date-wise that we're moving forward. So what are we doing in the final steps? If you're getting a loan, the lender is going to have you re-finalize some of the things that you put in your application. They're going to have to re-verify your employment. They're going to have to see your most recent bank statements. Again, it's like going to the doctor, so just be prepared. But understand, it's to make sure that they are comfortable loaning you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for those of you who have heard of it or are old enough to remember, we don't have the unpleasantness that we did in 2007 and 8 and 9 with all the loan issues that we had there. Okay. We will also go back just before closing, you and I, to do a final walkthrough of the property so we can evaluate any repairs that were done. we're typically going to get paid invoices so we know that they were taken care of by professionals, but also so we can eyeball it, make sure that the house is being delivered in the same or better condition than it was once we went under contract, which the sellers are contractually obligated to do. And usually we'll go straight from the final walkthrough to the closing attorney's office for closing. At closing will take about an hour. Basically, what you're signing is all the final deed paperwork. And then if you're getting a loan, that's what takes the longest, is signing all the mortgage and lending paperwork. After that is all done, after the money has been wired either from your account because you're paying cash or from the lender because you're getting a loan, and the attorney finalizes all the documents, the lender, if applicable, reviews everything and signs off on it. The attorney will then submit the paperwork to the county for recording. And typically an hour or two later, once the deed has been recorded with the county, the home is officially yours, and you can get in there and knock down walls, paint, cut the grass, build the fence, whatever you want. That's your house, and it's time to celebrate. That is the home buying process, kind of in 8 neat little steps. Any questions about that? Any surprises? All right. Sounds like people are on the same page. These are always some things I want my buyers to consider when they're thinking about buying and going through the process. So again, we touched on agency, understanding agency in North Carolina, buyer's agent versus seller's agent. One of the biggest mistakes a buyer can make is not using a buyer agent that's representing them and them alone, not also representing the seller. Again, while it is allowed in North Carolina, I don't practice it. No one in my company practices it. And I definitely don't advise that a client goes that route. Again, it is completely allowed. What are some benefits of buying? We did touch on this earlier. Mortgage interest deduction, depending on how you file your taxes. You can buy down your interest rate, building equity and lines of credit. A home office deduction. I do use that myself, and so does my wife, because we both work from home. Capital gains exclusion, depending on how you own the property, how you transfer the property, maybe a 1031 exchange later on down the line. Something big to understand is you do need money to purchase a home above and beyond the price of the home itself. So here's some typical expenses for buyers: the due diligence and earnest money, which we talked about and just touched on; the appraisal, which you'll have to pay directly to your lender for them to order the appraisal; paying for the home inspections. There are typically 3 that I recommend: home inspection, pest inspection, radon inspection, especially here in Central North Carolina. If you decide to get a survey, that would be an additional cost. Closing costs typically include your down payment, but also setting up your escrow accounts, understanding what setting aside money for your prorated tax and insurance bills that your lender is going to pay, or your mortgage servicer is going to pay for you every year, but also setting a couple of months aside for that. Paying any upfront HOA fees that you have to pay, the title search and attorney fees, any flood certification fees, and also for the deed recording. So again, there are prices, there are monies that you need to set aside and be prepared to pay for above and beyond just the purchase of the house. Yes, Casey.
Hi, this is great information. So thank you so much for how detailed it is. My question is, going back to the earnest money and the due diligence, can you talk about what best practices buyers typically do? Because to me, if I fall in love with a home and it looks appeasing, but I don't know what its bones are, right? Like, so you go through this process and you understand that there are repairs or, things that aren't going to pass inspection that could cause you to not want to buy the home. So is it just typically a cost that people just have to eat, or is there some sort of best practice that people implement to pretty much be sure that they're going to be okay with whatever is found, if that makes sense?
There are and there aren't. So I appreciate you asking that question, because this is a big question for folks, especially if you bought in another state where none of this applies, or where there is an actual thing of pass-fail inspections. In North Carolina, there's not pass-fail inspection. An inspection is an FYI. It's not a pass or fail. as far as a home inspection goes. So just to understand that. It really depends on a couple of things. If the home, how long's the home been on the market? If the home has just gotten on the market, I'm talking 7 days or less, well, a seller's going to want more because it hasn't been out there that long. If it's been on the market a month, maybe 2 months, we've got a lot more negotiation room there because, well, who else is coming along? I'm here. You're going to wait for somebody else to come along? Work with me here. Okay. My risk is going to be low because it's been on the market for a while. Maybe it's fallen through and we know that. Maybe another buyer walked away. Well, why? Well, there were some inspection issues, which we've worked on. Well, okay. Well, we're still not that comfortable with going high on the due diligence. On the other hand, hey, we're in multiple offers and all offers are due by Sunday at 5 o'clock. Well, you can bet your bottom dollar that a seller is going to want a high due diligence in that case because they're going to get a high due diligence from somebody else as well. Does that make sense, Casey? Is that helpful?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Of course, it could also depend on the purchase price, or the list price. Typically, that's a floating scale that kind of goes with the purchase price. They're going to want more if the home is listed for more, especially on earnest money. Earnest money is typically around 1%. But, if you're going lower on the due diligence money, you might go more on the earnest money to show them that you're serious, but I'm not as serious until we get through the due diligence process.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
Conversely, if you're in multiple offers and you go really high on the due diligence up front, well, you might not do any on earnest money because you've already put your best foot forward.
Yep. Thank you.
Of course. And for everybody's benefit, that's why there's not really a standard. And that's why you need someone who's been through the process and seen reasons for going low and seen reasons for going high. So I can give you kind of the best advice on how much skin to put in the game, because that's really what due diligence is. It's saying, I'm willing to bet this much money that I'm going to buy this house, and I'm willing to lose this much money if I decide to walk away. All right. I really appreciate the question, Casey. We're going to move on a couple more things to consider when buying, things to avoid. So you want to lock down all other spending when we start this process. Okay. You don't want to make any major purchases. Don't go buy a car. Don't start buying furniture. This can all throw your debt to income ratio out of whack. Don't move money around between different accounts unless you're doing it for the purpose of purchasing the home. Don't change your job unless you talk to your lender about it first if you're getting a mortgage. Now, you can change your job, and I've had plenty of people do it, but it's usually if you're moving within the same career. Okay. Don't miss or make any late payments for any credit cards or leases or anything like that. Do not open any new lines of credit. All of these things can throw off your debt to income ratio and could cause you to no longer be approved after you're already pre-approved, after you're under contract, and then you have to terminate and you've lost your due diligence money, maybe your earnest money, maybe you've already paid for the appraisal and the inspections. You're not going to get any of that money back. So please lock down spending, lock down opening new credit once we start the home buying process so it doesn't jeopardize your ability to move forward. You've probably all seen a meme or a joke or something of a buyer showing up at the final walkthrough in a brand new car and the agent just goes. So that's a fair warning. Closing and after to-dos, you're going to want to activate your utilities for the day of closing. So you have power when you move in. Any bonds or warranties, you're going to make sure you transfer those. A lot of folks like to change their keys or rekey their locks, things of that. Update your keypads or your garage doors, and make sure you change your address with USPS so you get your mail. So just a couple of reminders. Once we get towards closing, this will all come back up as reminders for you. This is just things I like to say up front to prepare you for the process. Me personally, in approaching this, especially with the strategy session, is about setting expectations for how things can play out. You might not remember them all as we go through the process, but you're more inclined to remember them or to say, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that when we get to that point, if we talk about it up front. So that's why I really front load the process with information. Here's a little bit more detail, the breakdown of some of these costs. Due diligence fee, again, negotiable. I typically say it's never going to be less than $1,000, but I'm not going to say it's always less than $1,000. Earnest money is usually around 1%, but not always 1%. So just to, plan for that. And then you've got estimated costs of different things like appraisal, home inspections, re-inspections, pest inspections, septic inspections, roof inspections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, these are all out of pocket costs for a buyer as we go through the process. Any questions about that before we move on to selling? I understand a lot of people might be first-time home buyers or never home buyers, or they've only bought out of state. So that can be very helpful for them or for you. But hopefully this will be helpful for you as you think about purchasing and selling down the line. I always advise my buyers, look, I know you're going to live in this home and it's your primary residence, but it's also an investment. So also think about maybe the end of your time in this home and what it would be like when you sell. Also, folks who currently own a home who are maybe thinking about some of these reasons why people sell. Hopefully this will really help you in your decision making in the next steps. So why do people sell? Well, an equity opportunity. We talked about why people buy. It's to build equity, right? So now people have equity. Well, maybe they want to cash out while the values are high. Maybe they want to use it to buy a new property. Maybe they want to use it towards another investment or life goal. Maybe they're downsizing, but they want to take a trip of a lifetime. Maybe they're downsizing and they want to buy a second home at the beach. There's a lot of reasons for why people sell. Also, of course, life transitions, relocating for a job, which happens a lot, especially in this area. That's a reason a lot of people buy, but also a reason a lot of people sell. Family changes, maybe divorce, kids going to school, retirement, upsizing and downsizing, needs evolve. Your current home no longer fits your lifestyle. Maintenance or cost concerns. Maybe your home is older and you're not in a position to do a lot of work, or you just don't want to. Maybe your taxes have risen and you're just priced out for taxes. You want less tax burden. Maybe your HOA fees or the HOA itself has become something you don't want to be a part of. For market strategy, moving equity into different markets or property types. Maybe they're selling an investment property in one place and moving it to an investment property in an area that they see as growth versus stagnation. Maybe they just want new construction. So a lot of reasons that people decide to sell. Walking through the home selling process, a few more steps here, but that's because in selling, there's a lot more work, both for me and for you as a seller up front. So like I said before, if you check out on anything else, check in for this if home selling is something that you're interested in understanding. Again, starting with the appointment, the strategy session. In a situation like this, the first step is coming to your house. I want to meet you. I want you to tell me your story, the story of your current property, how long you've lived there, why you bought it in the first place, maybe what you've done to it, maybe what you haven't done to it. What are people going to love about it? Maybe what people aren't going to love about it. Let's look at things that need to be done, but also talking about the process, what you need to do to get it ready to list. We're also going to talk about what's your home worth on the marketplace today in the current condition. And much like I mentioned, working with buyers, and I'm going to bring a market analysis as we're looking at homes, I'm going to bring the same thing to the listing appointment. So I can tell you what's sold around you for what price per square foot, what's similar, what's different, and we can dial in on the price that makes the most sense today in today's marketplace. And one, tough conversation or tough conversations that you have with sellers is, well, they have an emotional attachment to the house, and that's fine. And that's understandable, but that's not going to reflect in the marketplace. The marketplace will tell you what your home is worth. And sure, maybe you've made some upgrades or additions, but again, the marketplace is going to dictate the values of those, not an emotional attachment to it, unfortunately. So I will tell folks, my job is to tell you what I think is the right information, not necessarily what I want you to hear, because I'm not going to tell you something to earn your business and then be explaining 6 months to you or 6 months later to you why your house didn't sell. That's not good for either one of us. My job is to give you the information, explain to you why I believe what I believe, and then help you make the right decision about taking the next step. And I'm really data driven. And that means a lot to me to be able to say, look at the facts. This isn't emotional, because I know when a buyer agent brings their buyer to your house, that's what they're doing. And that's what I mean when the market is going to dictate what something is going to sell for. So moving on, we've done that. We've set the expectations for how long we think it's going to sit on the market, the price range we think it will sell for, what we think you need to do to your home. So maybe we need to bring a stager in because you're really uncertain, or you got a lot of stuff in there. I see a lot of homes with buyers. I know what buyers are looking like or for. I can tell you what they like and they don't like in a home. So in a way, I like to think I'm helping my seller stage as well. But there are opportunities where maybe we need to bring in some other things as well, and we can do that. What I want you to do is make sure that you spend the least amount of money and time possible to get the best return for your investment in that time and money in selling the property. So we'll walk through, we'll talk about the things you need to do, the things you should do, the things I don't recommend you wasting time, effort, or money on, and then let's move forward. Pre-marketing your home, we want to do everything we can to get eyes on your property. The best way to do that is to make sure that it's ready day one when we hit the market. We can go in coming soon. We can let people know, but the first day it hits the market active, I want to make sure that it looks as good as possible, because someone might only see your house the first time it shows up in the search alert. So if we had pictures done, but you didn't cut the grass, well, they might not look past the grass, or they might not look past the junk in the dining room. We want to make sure it looks spectacular when we have pictures and measurements done. So when we push that out online, it looks as good as possible. Really quickly, Wilma, thanks for your comment. We're going to send the recording link out later so you can watch the rest of the presentation, and feel free to reach out to me later on if you'd like to talk more. I appreciate you dialing in. Once we go live, it means your house is officially on the market. You got to keep your home ready to show all the time, because we never know when we're going to get a showing request. And I know it's not always fun, and I know it's not always easy, but as sellers, you need to be flexible. And that means keeping your house clean, but also with time. You know, buyers only have so much time to see homes, and they might only have one time to see a home. Maybe they're visiting from out of town. I had a client close this week who flew in from Chicago a month ago. We saw about 14 homes in 2 days. There were at least 2 homes that sellers couldn't accommodate. Well, guess what? She didn't get to consider those homes. She made a decision while she was here that weekend. So you have to be very flexible and be able to let people in your home, to accommodate showings, to accommodate open houses. People by and large aren't going to make a decision unless they walk through your house. So make it easier for them to, on their schedule, not necessarily yours. Once we get an offer, congrats. Does this work? Where do we want to counter? What do we like about the offer? What do we not like about the offer? Where's the offer come in versus the price we talked about and the comps we talked about? What else are they asking for? Are they asking for any repairs up front? Are they giving a fair amount of due diligence and earnest money? What's the closing date are they asking for? And is the money appropriate for that? One thing I didn't mention early, Casey, and for everyone else, if you're asking for an extended closing period, maybe beyond 30 days, maybe 45 days, maybe 60 days, well, you can bet a seller's going to want more due diligence money and more earnest money, because that's more of a risk to them, because that's more time for something to go wrong or for you to walk away. So understanding all of those things. Are they asking for appliances? Here's a fun fact. What is considered personal property and what is not considered personal property? Somebody answer this. Is a refrigerator considered personal property or an appliance? Not everybody at once. Come on, just one person. You're right. Jessica, you're not the agent, are you? That would be cheating. Okay. Thank you. Yes, a refrigerator is considered personal property. There are also 2 other things that are considered personal property but people typically ask for. That's a washer and dryer. They do not automatically convey. They are considered personal property. So if you go into a home that you want to buy and there's a refrigerator and there's a washer and dryer, then we're going to write those as personal property in the offer that they convey. Now, things that typically convey automatically: a built-in oven or stove, a cooktop, a microwave that's affixed, a dishwasher. Those appliances are considered fixtures. They're considered affixed to the property, not personal property. So understanding that too when viewing a property, because if they're not going to convey, or we can't get them added to the offer, that's an additional expense for the buyer, or it's an expense for the seller. Thanks, Jessica. Um, uh, if that could be an expense for either a buyer or a seller after the fact. So you want to consider that in your offer, because you've got total costs, right? Just like you would consider if you got to replace the HVAC. So understanding all that when putting the offer together or reviewing the offer. Going under contract, now we're on the other side of the due diligence and earnest money period, right? As a seller, you've agreed to these terms, you've received the due diligence, you've deposited in your account, that's your money, right? Now we get out of the way, we allow the buyer the opportunity to have these inspections done, and then maybe they do or they don't come back to us and ask us to negotiate because, well, they found termites, or there's something wrong with one of the roof trusses, or there's a leak in the toilet. These are the things that are negotiated out, and you can agree to do it, you cannot agree to do it, you can agree to do part of it, you can maybe give a concession for them to have it done after the fact. That's the due diligence piece on the seller side. Now, once we get through that due diligence period, everybody usually wipes their brow a little bit and they say, okay, we've agreed to all this. Maybe the work hasn't been done yet. If you agree to repairs, the work doesn't have to be done during the due diligence period. It just needs to be done before closing. Also, an important thing to point out: doesn't need to be done during that due diligence period, just needs to be done before closing. And that's all documented as part of the process, right? Because if it's not, then the seller is in breach. And that's one of the few times that a buyer can actually recoup their due diligence money, not to get too far into the weeds. But when we're in the earnest period, hopefully we're smooth sailing. We're just waiting for the final approval from the lender, waiting for the seller to finalize all the title work, etc. Last steps, we'll review the closing disclosures, make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Big thing is, this is the period where the seller needs to get out. You got to be out the day of closing. You don't need to be moving boxes out when the buyer comes back from the attorney's office and it's recorded. You need to typically be out the night before closing, no later than very early the next day, because the buyers are going to come do the walkthrough, and you want to leave and are required to leave the property in the same or better condition. And that typically also means cleaning it up somewhat. You don't want to leave trash, garbage, dirt, dust everywhere. I'm not sure if it's Noral or Noral, but please go right ahead.
Yes, had to unmute there. I'll back up a moment on the refrigerator, washer, dryer. I've had a builder tell me that on a new home they are building and selling, that they are required to supply the washer, dryer, and refrigerator, and I'm required to take what they supply.
They might require that as part of the terms of their contract, but overall, builders can write their own contracts in North Carolina, so that might be part of the terms that they have built in.
Right.
So that could be their personal requirement, but there's no requirement as far as real estate in North Carolina that a seller or builder have to provide a refrigerator, washer, and dryer. I've certainly had folks that buy new construction who got neither refrigerator nor washer and dryer.
Right. Thank you. I was thinking the way you are, but this builder was insisting it wasn't them, it was the state or somebody telling them they had to.
Well, I appreciate you asking that question, but that would not be what I've experienced and not my understanding.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for the question. I appreciate it. So we left it on moving out. Please leave it the way you'd want it if you were buying the house and moving in. You're going to go sign the documents. Typically, the seller will sign the documents before the actual day of closing, typically a few days before. We're not meeting at the closing table like they used to, so the buyer and seller aren't sitting across from the table and shaking each other's hands and signing documents at the same time. I know that went on in the past, but that doesn't happen anymore. So by and large, you're probably never going to see the buyer or the seller, depending on who you are. And then After it's closing, and again, after it's recorded, the attorney will distribute your funds, your proceeds. That includes paying off your mortgage, which is required to be done if you sell a home that has a mortgage. They will pay it off from your proceeds, and then they'll distribute the rest to you, and then you can move on. Maybe you're buying another house. I've helped clients who bought another house the same day. In that instance, the attorney, will very likely wire your proceeds to the closing attorney for your purchase if it's not the same attorney, so you can apply those towards that purchase. Buying and selling at the same time is another whole ball of wax, but it's the same process. It's just about herding the cats and, juggling everything to make it happen on the same day. And it's definitely doable. But that is the home selling process. What we do as an agency for you. Hey, why do I need an agent to help me sell my home? Why can't I FSBO it? Well, a FSBO meaning for sale by owner. Well, there are a lot of reasons. First of all is you need somebody to guide you through this process and to make sure your house looks the way it should, and to make sure that it's priced appropriately so your expectations are set, and to help you understand what's going on with your house so you can properly fill out the documents and disclose what's happening, so you don't get 3 weeks into the process and then the buyer decides to walk away. There are a lot of reasons why, well more than half of for sale by owners don't make it all the way to the closing table. The biggest reason is there wasn't an agent involved to help get it there. Homes that sell with an agent also typically sell for more than for sale by owner. So there's a lot, and we can talk about that if people have a question about for sale by owner individually as a group. But overall, this is what we do. We're going to make sure that we walk you through the process. We're going to make sure that our professional photographer and measurements are done, again, to put your best foot forward. If people don't like the way your house looks online, they're not going to schedule an appointment. So it needs to look fantastic when they're clicking. Okay. Any guidance as far as interior design or work repairs that needs to be done, vendors to help with work that needs to be done, if you need someone to help with a roof repair or just painting or carpet or touch-ups, any of those, and full service handling everything, the process, the showings, negotiation, all of those things. We've got you covered top to bottom, and that's why you should trust an agent to help you with this process, which hopefully you understand is a lot more than just putting a sign in the ground and waiting for somebody to bring you an offer. There are closing costs for the seller too, above and beyond your payoff for your loan. That's deed prep for the attorney. That's tax stamps, which is the excise tax, which is basically a sales tax in North Carolina. Your prorated shares of the property taxes or HOA dues for the year, if they haven't been paid in advance. If they have been in paid advance, you'll get a prorated rebate to you or refund at closing that the buyer will be paying. Commissions, of course, fees associated with the loan payoff or transferring funds, or any costs that were agreed to be shared with the seller in accordance with the final offer to purchase. So those are some additional closing costs. So we've talked about why people buy and sell. We've talked about the process. Before we talk a little bit about financial and strategic insights, any other questions or clarification needed that I can answer? And again, we certainly will have time for Q&A here in a little bit. I think we're moving along fantastic as far as our schedule goes. So just a couple of insights from working in the business. Okay. Is cash king? Who thinks that you can pay less for a house because you're offering cash than if you're using a mortgage? Anyone think that you should be able, or you can offer less because you're paying cash? I'm glad nobody's saying yes, because 99% of the time the answer is no. You know why? You know what the seller gets from the bank? They get cash. So they get cash anyways. All right. So if you're a buyer and you've got cash, you're sitting on a wad of cash, that doesn't mean you can just come and drop a 10 or 20% lowball offer because you're paying cash. The seller's going to get cash from the bank if the buyer is using a mortgage. Now, what's the advantage to cash? Well, typically you can close quicker, and that's certainly an advantage, but is closing 2 weeks earlier worth 5, 10, 20% less than market value? maybe to somebody in a really tight situation, but overwhelmingly no. So that's a misconception that I like to try to reframe for everyone, is that cash is not king when it comes to buying a home, unless someone is in a really desperate situation. Okay. You should not believe that you're going to be able to pay significantly less than asking or market if it's priced right, just because you're offering cash. What are your mortgage options? They are going to be different for everyone. Now, there are types. You've got conventional, you've got VA, which is a great product for veterans. You've got FHA, you've got USDA, you've got 1031 exchange for folks selling and buying a property to defer taxes. All of these are going to depend on your specific situation. The cost of those, your limits, your max price, your cost to actually qualify for the loan, your interest rate are all going to depend on your specific situation. And further than that, the actual property that you're buying. And that's why it's really important that you do the mortgage pre-approval legwork up front, so you have all of those questions answered before you start looking at and falling in love with a house that ultimately won't work out. And you find that out down the line if you haven't done the work up front. I'll connect you with a great lender partner who can answer all those questions for you, help you explore different options. Maybe it's more out of pocket up front, but a lower interest rate and lower payment. Maybe you don't have as much money out of pocket, and that's fine. You're willing to pay a little bit more monthly to get in there and to keep that cash in your pocket. Explore those options, help you understand what's going to work best for you to get you ultimately where you want to be, and that's in the house that you love. But again, I can't stress it enough. Very important to do up front. Also, so you understand the money you need out of pocket at closing, those closing costs that we talked about, planning for that due diligence and earnest money that we talked about, planning for concessions, planning for contingencies, and also, using real estate as an investment vehicle to plan for building wealth, not only for you, but maybe generational wealth for your family, going back to some of those things that we talked about earlier. So just a little bit of insight there in and around things associated with real estate from the financial strategic side. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation as far as the buying and selling process, talking about reasons for buying and selling, and maybe giving you some context for the marketplace where we are right now, and also thinking about preparing financially for buying or selling. This is hopefully where we can talk a little bit. Feel free to unmute, raise your hand, type in the group. I would love to answer questions that you have. I would love to hear about your experience buying or selling, good or bad, what worked, what didn't, what would you have done differently? Or maybe let's talk about your dreams. Who's interested in buying? Tell me where you're looking, what you're hoping to find, what's your time frame. We've got time to talk. So go right ahead.
Okay, I'll kick it off with another question, another line here. Suppose you own your house free of mortgage, all paid off. You're basically going to downsize some, looking to sell and buy a lower priced house. But you might not be able to do it exactly the same time. And maybe you got enough assets you could liquidate some to buy the new house, but perhaps you don't want to do that and need maybe a bridge loan. Have you had experience? Can you talk a little bit about the bridge loan process and so forth?
Sure. I've definitely done a bridge loan myself to use to make sure I had enough for a down payment to get into the house I'm in currently, so we could move and then list the house that we were in previously without living there. That's absolutely an option. Also, you might have enough equity in your home, especially if you're downsizing, to buy the new house outright. And then you can sell it off completely once you sell your current house. There are definitely options to do that. And definitely, my lender can help you explore those options and which one works best for your specific situation.
You said something there that I didn't quite catch and understand. The new house we own, I mean, the current house we own, full equity in it, it's say valued more than the new house we would buy. So we've got enough equity in the new existing house to buy the new house,
Right.
but we just haven't sold it yet.
Right.
Uh, you talked something about using that equity to buy the new house.
Yes.
What exactly do you mean by that without having a bridge loan?
Well, I mean, that's a similar, it could be a similar product. I mean, we're talking about a similar thing. Basically, you're taking the equity in your current home, using it to purchase a new home. And then as long as you're qualified to make that payment on a monthly basis until you sell your existing home, then you could do that. And then with the understanding that if you wanted to, you could pay the loan off completely once you
Yes.
sell your existing
I,
home.
I think I catch what you're saying then is to make basically you take a mortgage on the existing home.
Yeah, like a line of credit. Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Rather than a bridge loan.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's different products, but very similar products. Yes.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a bridge loan would be basically maybe not using any of the equity. So it probably makes more sense to use the equity that you have. But again, you know, a lender can help you explore different options. What's going to be the most effective, maybe cost you the less.
Okay. I think I see the point here. I did it. I had a bridge loan, I think, once before, but I was going from a less expensive to more expensive house. In this case, I'd be going the other direction, and I could probably use the equity, as you say, a mortgage on the existing house, in effect, to finance the new one. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad that helped. Good question. Good question, Jessica. It can be similar. Here's the thing about if you're just buying the land up front, lenders aren't going to lend for a piece of land like they are for an existing home. So typically you're going to need at least half down to buy land if you're just buying the land outright before starting. Now, there are also construction to perm options. So if you've identified a piece of land that you want and you've identified a builder that you want to work with, and you've talked to them about a plan and we can put together what the total price of the land plus the construction is, then there are construction to perm options that a lender can offer you and work through you with that helps you secure the land and then start and complete the construction process. And if you're working with a builder, that would include all that cost would include the permitting, et cetera. Now, if you're going to do them separately, then you would need to purchase the land. And again, you're probably talking about having to bring 50% up front. Also, there aren't a lot of lenders that even do land loans. First Citizens is typically one of them, maybe the credit unions, just because there's more risk associated with vacant land than there is with a home. Any other questions about that, Jessica? Was that helpful? Okay, great. And I certainly have experience helping people do that. If you want to if that's something you're interested in, we can talk offline about that a little bit more. Feel free to reach out. I've got a one-on-one question here. Asking, talking about mortgage assumptions generally. In particular, if a person who has never owned a home assumes a mortgage from a family member, would that count as being a first-time home buyer? And then that person could qualify for that is a great question and a very, very rare thing that I've never come across that personally in 11 years in real estate. For the person that asked the question, that would definitely be a lender question so they can let you know. This person, and if no one else is familiar, there are multiple loan types that are assumable, which basically means you're taking on the loan. In most cases, when you do that, you're taking on the loan, which is remaining on the property. And then in some other way, you're paying for the rest of the value. So let me explain it like this. Say a home is worth $500,000 and the seller owes $200,000 on the mortgage. Okay. If you're going to buy that home and assume that loan, and you've agreed to a sales price of $500,000, well, you're assuming the $200,000 loan at whatever rate and other conditions apply to that current loan. And then you're either bringing in cash or in the form of another mortgage or in a combination of those two to make up the remainder of the purchase price, if that makes sense. Now, the loan assumption, the lender is going to have to approve that, and you're going to have to qualify just like you would for any other loan. Just because someone is willing to let you assume it, it doesn't mean they're just like, here, take this. My cousin's willing to take this on. He can have it. There's still a pretty lengthy process that you have to go through to qualify for the loan, probably above and beyond what you would if you were not assuming a loan and just getting your own loan. As far as the would you qualify for a first-time homebuyer grant in North Carolina, I'm not sure about that, honestly. That would definitely be a lender question, but a really good one because I've never had anyone ask it before. So thank you for asking that question. Jessica, that's exciting that you've got a background in architecture. I mean, I thought it was cool just to renovate. I can't imagine, helping design from the ground up. That would be really cool. Oh, Sarah asked above. Sorry, I just saw Sarah. What's a bridge lump? I think maybe you meant bridge loan, which is what we were talking about. That's basically where you borrow a certain amount of money to help kind of cover a gap. Maybe if you're purchasing, to help you cover your down payment to get in that property while you're maybe selling or waiting for another property to sell. That's usually the example that's used in real estate. Go for it.
Yeah, another topic. You had experience in selling older homes that may have a lot of problems in them, that need a lot of renovation, and so forth, to the extent maybe a buyer might not be able to get a mortgage, for instance. Can you talk about that situation a little bit?
Sure. There are going to be some baseline things that are required for somebody to get a mortgage on a property. Typically that's, it's in livable condition. I'll give you a great example personally. The house that I'm in right now that I bought, we bought it as a foreclosure. It didn't have an oven. I had a conventional loan. We could not get approval without an oven being in place. So the bank who owned the property through the foreclosure, they installed an oven because they wanted to sell the property. VA, FHA loans, they do basically their own inspections as part of an appraisal, and they often require a certain amount of repairs or specific repairs be done before they'll approve a loan going forward. That's very typical.
What about the possibility of just selling as is to some buyer who's probably not going to be able to get a mortgage, when you've got a lot of things that need to be done in terms of repairs and so forth on the property?
Well, I'm glad you said that. Typically, every home that's sold in North Carolina is sold as is because a seller is not ever required to make any repairs. Even if a lender requires it, that's the buyer's problem, not the seller's problem. Now, it could be the seller's problem because they want to sell the property and they don't have any other buyers lined up. So they decide to make the repairs, but they're not required to make any repairs. Now, the difference in doing that and listing a property as is, which you might do in a property that's not in good, or condition, is you would say up front, look, we're aware that the property needs work. We're not going to do any work. We're selling it as is. It's priced accordingly. But still, depending on the loan type, there could be conditions that are required to be met for the loan to be approved for the purchase to go through. Now, if somebody's just paying cash, they can do anything they want. I hope that helped. Let's see here. If a person has a property that they rent, either a residence or farm for forestry and crop operations, is it a good idea to create a business like an LLC? If so, does the deed have to be put in the name of the LLC for protection? None of that is required, but I own property that's not my primary residence that I have in an LLC, and that's for protection. We rent the property. It gives us an extra layer of protection in case something happened to a renter at the property. You know, my financial advisor, my CPA advised me to do both of those, and I've done. As far as maintaining rights, yes, you can maintain rights to different properties. In this instance, asking about water, use of water. With every property that's sold in North Carolina, residential property, there's a document called the Mineral Oil and Gas Rights Disclosure. This really came about like in the mid to early teens because of fracking in North Carolina. A developer had sold rights to subsurface gas rights under a whole development, and all the owners found about it after the fact, after they were already living in the neighborhood. So that kind of came out about that. This is why that document came about. So you're basically saying yes or no. I am not aware if a owner before me severed any rights to mineral oil or gas rights subsurface to the property, or I haven't, and I am not planning to do that either. So, I mean, you can get really creative with things like that. That would just be, that would be something you'd want an attorney to draw up as an addendum to a contract. That wouldn't be part of the standard purchase agreement in North Carolina. I hope that answered your question. Got another question here. As a first-time home buyer, how does one pick an agency to represent? I think you just talk to them and see who you're comfortable with. That's what I do. I mean, when I meet with someone, I treat it like they're interviewing me and I'm auditioning for the job. I seek to understand and ask questions and provide value. If you're at the point where you want to do that, or even if it's down the line, let's grab coffee. Let's get to know each other so I can understand what's important to you. And I can explain to you how I approach the process. Thanks for that question, Neo. Appreciate it. Let's see. Is there any benefit to buying a house with majority cash? Great question. Additionally, is there anything to look out for when purchasing a new construction home? Also a great question. So for majority cash, it really just depends, and let me use that to have this discussion as well. A lot of people want to pay their home off as quick as possible. And certainly there's benefits to that. You don't have a monthly mortgage payment anymore. Who would not want that? But let me ask you this too. My current interest rate on my house is 2.8. My savings account, I can get 4% right now. So what makes more sense? To pay off my mortgage or to let that money sit in a savings account and draw 4%?
Yeah,
I mean,
you got that kind of rate.
I mean, it has to make sense for you, right? It's got to make sense for you. Maybe you've got so much cash that you don't need to have a lot of cash on hand and you just want to pay it off for peace of mind, or putting a lot more down so your payment is lower. Those are kind of the pros and cons to cash. I think that really just comes down to what works best for you and what other things can you do with your cash that maybe makes more sense than putting it down. In this era, it probably makes more sense to put cash down because rates are higher. But, in my example, that's why I chose not to. And somebody still might advise me to do that. So it really just depends. When purchasing a new home, yes. When you go to purchase a new home, one thing you need to understand is if you go into the neighborhood and you want to look at the house, fine. But that agent there does not work for you. They work for the builder. And no one is there to look out for you. So before you start looking at new homes and going into these new home communities, meet with an agent, pick an agent to represent you, Take an agent with you so you can tell them, hey, this is my person that's representing me, that's looking out for me. Otherwise, you've got no leverage if something comes up that needs to be repaired, or that you've got no one to advocate for you who's been through that process. So there are a lot of things to look out in new construction. You should definitely always have a home inspection done for new construction, pre-drywall and post-drywall. So Precious, we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like to, but I hope that answers both of your questions. Pros and cons of putting a home in a trust. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a financial planner. What I would say is if you're planning for generational wealth or wanting to defer taxes by passing property to a family member or a child or something like that, then there are a lot of pluses to do that. Ones I'm not necessarily qualified and want to stay in my lane and explain here, but I would definitely talk to someone about that, Sarah, because those are things that I'm involved in and that people around me are involved in, and that make a lot of sense, especially if you've got, maybe you're older, you have older parents that are planning for kind of the next phase. Do I have any recommendation on where to start when investing in real estate? I've heard so many things: wholesaling, house hacking, buying a fourplex and living in one. Out of the ones that you mentioned, probably the fourplex and live in one makes the most sense. Maybe we're in a better environment now for flipping, etc., than we were previously, but you also have to take in consideration the market. This stuff works better when homes are distressed, where people can't afford to update them, or they're underwater as far as a mortgage, etc. In competitive markets, they're not as effective because the markets are competitive, if that makes sense. If I'm a young person starting out, like one thing that we're planning to do for our sons, if they go to college, or maybe even if not, to help them to get started, is buy a townhome or a condo that's got 4 bedrooms, and they can rent the other 3 and effectively live for free. That's one way to think about real estate investing and starting at a young age. And maybe you want to do it as somebody that's young, and maybe you can't necessarily afford it yourself, but you've got the people lined up, you have to rent, and maybe a relative or someone can co-sign to help you get started. And now you're starting out. And now when you graduate from school and you move somewhere else, well, you've got this asset that you can rent full time, and maybe you use the equity in that as a down payment on your primary residence that you buy in the new town or something like that. And that's how you kind of start stacking those things. I hope that makes sense, Jessica. Precious, you're welcome. What rough percentage of the total house price is usually recommended? What is the typical down payment for? So if you don't put at least 20% down, you're going to be paying mortgage insurance, which is PMI, which is going to increase your monthly payment. So if you can get to 20%, that's very advantageous to help avoid that PMI. Now, if you have to use PMI because you can only put 3% or 5% or something less than 20% down, that's okay. That still can get you in the house. And over time, once you get to 20% equity, you can have the PMI removed. I would run the numbers as far as renting and saving versus what the payment would be to have PMI, but to be able to get in the property, own it outright, take the mortgage deduction, etc. You might find out that even though you can't put as much down and you have to pay PMI, it makes more sense both in the short and long term over renting. I hope that makes sense, Matthew. Kathy, thanks for dialing in. Feel free to connect with me after the fact. AP, thanks for the yes, if you have it in an LLC, you still own it, you can still sell it, etc., and the same rights. But you will do a new deed with an attorney if you put it in your LLC name. And also you might need to check with your lender if there's an existing mortgage on it, because effectively you're transferring ownership to someone who doesn't own the mortgage. So you want to talk to your attorney and your mortgage company about that before you do that. I'm glad that was helpful, Matthew. Great questions, folks. I really appreciate it. I met with some student athletes at a panel talking about career, et cetera, from NC State the other night with some other alumni. And my number one advice to them was buy a home as soon as you can, because it really is the best way to start building some equity in something that you're actually using yourself, and to build something that you can use as an asset down the line, especially if you're going to be renting anyways, and especially if you can rent rooms to your teammates or your friends, et cetera. Now, not everybody might agree with me, and because there's plenty of people out there who say owning a home is a liability, and that's fine, but it's worked out pretty good for me. Anyone else? We have until 2 o'clock. We certainly don't have to take until 2 o'clock. It's been a lot of information, I know, to digest. I hope you've been able to at least bite off some pieces. The Alumni Association will send an email out with the link to the recording after the fact, so you can rewatch, share with your friends. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to move on to the next slide just for next steps. So I got three QR codes here, and I'll give everybody a chance to click on all of them, just moving left to right. So first, register on my website. It's doug.the, like Ohio State, but Oceanaire with an E on the end of it, like millionaire, but Oceanaire Realty.com. And if you click on that, that'll take you to my registration page. You can enter your information. You can contact me directly through the site. You can build a search to send you properties. We can talk after the fact about what your goals are, what your criteria is, and I can really craft that search for you to make sure that you're getting properties that make sense for what you're looking for. And look, I don't want anybody to think it's too early to have a conversation. I've met with people 2, 3, 4 years before they first bought a house. Okay, let's start building the relationship now. I might be able to give you some information to get you where you want sooner, or to at least set the stage better so you can plan a little bit better for that. The second one, our buyer and seller strategy guide page. You got some snapshots of those as I went through the presentation. This will take you to a page which has a link for both the buyer and strategy full guides, so you can explore those on your own, kind of recap what we went through today. And then the last one is schedule a one-on-one meeting with me. This will take you directly to my calendar. You can pick a time, you can pick a date, you can pick a 30-minute window for us to get acquainted and talk a little bit more about accomplishing your goals. Let's see, I got another question. Yes, as a real estate agent, you can represent yourself. You absolutely can, and I have represented myself. What is the 1031 exchange mentioned? So a 1031 exchange is typically used when you're selling a property that's not your primary residence. And if you sell it, you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes. So if you use a 1031 exchange, that means you're using the money from the sale to buy a similar property, and you're just rolling that money into the purchase, and you can defer taxes that way. That's a 1031 exchange in the simplest terms. Now, you need a 1031 exchange specialist to help you do that. There is some costs associated with that. You also have a finite amount of time to pick the property that you're planning to purchase and also close on it. So it's not completely simple, but that's the long and short of it. So I hope that answers your question. You're very welcome. Let's see, do I have one more slide? Okay, packing up, let's wrap it up. So find me personally. Of course, you can find the Oceanaire Realty on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok. You can also find us on the oceanairerealty.com. I really encourage you to follow us. We do more than just post buying and selling. We share a lot of value about the process, but also about the neighborhoods and markets that we work and live in. Also, please feel free to connect with me personally. One of my favorite things about real estate is that I get to meet great people and help them make a great decision about something for their family. My name is Doug. Last name is Yopp, Y-O-P-P. There aren't that many of me. So if you type that in, I'm relatively easy to find on networks like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, etc. You also get to see pictures of my kids playing soccer and my dog sleeping on the couch, and at plenty of NC State events as well. Keep an eye out for the email with the recap of the presentation and also my contact information so you can reach out to me. And just thanks to everyone for attending. I really appreciate the interaction and your time and the questions, especially. Thanks to Harrison and Allison from the Alumni Association for helping plan all of this. I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, so I appreciate everybody. And before I let you go, any other final thoughts, questions, etc.? Yes, thank you, Harrison, so much. All right, well, I hope to see everybody at the Lenny Friday night at 9 o'clock. Alabama Blazers are going down. Go Pack. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Harrison. I appreciate it.